This has been a very interesting development. So let me just start by an explanation. What are panda bonds and what are dim sum bonds? Panda bonds are bonds that foreign companies or governments issue here in the mainland in RMB. Dim sum bonds are renminbi bonds that are issued outside of China, mostly in Hong Kong, by foreign governments or foreign companies. So if I'm looking to raise renminbi, I can go to either the panda bond market or the dim sum bond market. Now, why this is a really interesting subject today is the panda bond and the dim sum bond market, they were introduced 10 years ago and didn't really do anything. They were introduced back around 2015 for the specific purpose of internationalizing the renminbi. This goes a little bit to the earlier talk that I gave about the renminbi challenging the US dollar for global supremacy. And back in 2015, there was a real, I think, desire in Beijing to try and really internationalize the renminbi. Cross-border, get more companies using the renminbi, so on and so forth. And these two different bonds were part of that process. Now, fast forward 10 years, and they weren't really successful. Nobody wanted to raise renminbi. What do I do with the renminbi? And yet, in the last month, these bonds are back, and they're back strong. Why? Again, like I said, this goes to the argument, or the conversation rather, about the US dollar and its use as a currency globally. There's no question that the United States dominates what we call in the business capital formation. Capital formation simply means if I'm a government or I'm a country or a company and I need to raise money to fund my business, to fund whatever, I go to the United States. I can list stock, I can list bonds. The American market is large, it's liquid, there's a lot of demand. So it's not just American companies that use the American market to raise money. Companies from all over the world do it. And they raise it in US dollars, right? Another example of why the US dollar supremacy as a reserve currency will be maintained for the foreseeable future. But there's still that risk. There's the need for optionality. It's not just China, but it's companies and countries around the world that rely on that American capital market. What happens if the American government decides to weaponize its capital market and say, you can't access our markets anymore? How do you raise capital? So in the last month, what has happened is China has brought back, I mean, it's always been there, but they've come back with supporting measures, the panda and dim sum market. And let me give you a really great example of how this is expected to play out over the next, in my opinion, 10 years. In an earlier video, I mentioned that the Russians and the Chinese agreed to build a new pipeline called the Power of Siberia Mark II. During those negotiations, the commercial company on the Russian side is a company called Gazprom. Now, Gazprom and their local Chinese counterpart, CNPC, China National Petroleum, agreed that, okay, in Russia, the pipeline will be built by Gazprom, and in China, the pipeline will be built by CNPC. Makes sense. But Gazprom's having a little problem with financing. They need money to build that pipeline. So the first thing they did is they went to China in the negotiations and said, why don't you pay us first for the natural gas that we will deliver in the future? The Chinese understandably said, we don't feel comfortable with that arrangement. You know, you go do what you need to do. But again, Gazprom is struggling to find access to financing. Because of the war in Ukraine, Russian companies struggle to be able to raise money. The very next day after that arrangement was announced between Russia, well, basically Putin and Xi Jinping, the Chinese government announced that Gazprom and a few other Russian companies were being approved to issue panda bonds, billions of panda bonds. So what does this mean? It means that you now have these Russian organizations, large companies, being able to come into China and raise renminbi. Okay, how do I use renminbi to be able to build a pipeline in Russia? Well, it's great because China has a lot of companies that are really good at building pipelines. So Gazprom will most likely hire Chinese companies to go and build the pipeline and pay them in renminbi. For me, this is fascinating because this is exactly what the United States did after World War II with the Marshall Plan, which I think I've talked about in the past. The Marshall Plan was America, being very benevolent, said, oh, Europe was destroyed in the war. We want to come in and help rebuild. Wonderful. So the Americans lent money in US dollars to France and Germany and England to help rebuild. That's great. But the American government said, you can only use the money we lend you to hire American companies to help you rebuild. So it was beneficial for America at least equally as much as it was for the European nations. It's kind of the same thing here with the Panda bonds. Gazprom gets what they want, but Gazprom does need to most likely hire Chinese companies, so it's a benefit for all parties involved. In fact, just yesterday, the government of Kazakhstan announced that they were going to issue, I think it was a Panda bond, it might be dim sum in Hong Kong, $2 or $3 billion, or 2 or 3 billion renminbi actually, for their own needs in Kazakhstan. Now, we've already seen Tencent in Hong Kong. Tencent raised $2 billion, I believe, last week in dim sum bonds. I have not seen this much activity in Panda or dim sum bonds in years, but it's what this signals that's most important. The Gazprom deal is vital for people to understand because China is now signaling not just to the SCO members, but also to the whole global South. If you need financing, you can come to China and either go to the mainland market or go to the Hong Kong market and issue these bonds in renminbi. And it provides, again, as I keep coming back to, that optionality that is much needed because of the overwhelming concerns that the United States will continue to move forward with this weaponization of their capital markets or their currency or whatever they deem needed to be able to maintain their hegemonic power. Again, this is a subject that ties in with everything that I've been talking about this morning. And I'm fascinated to see how it plays out. It's definitely going to be a subject I'll talk about in the future because it's only the start. More and more of these Panda bonds and these dim sum bonds will be issued over the course of the next decade. And it's all going to go to support the global South. And I think it's just a brilliant move by Beijing.